How can a team like Ferrari, with two champions behind the wheel, fail historically in their own circuit against thousands of tifosi? What the hell was wrong in Imola so that they would not even go to Q3? The classification of the Emilia Romagna 2025 prize was not just a disappointing day for Ferrari, it was an unprecedented humiliation that resonated as a roller throughout the paddock and felt like a straight punch to the heart of each tifosi present in Imola. This circuit, officially known as Enzo e Dino Ferrari Autodrome, is not a simple layout for the Scuderia. It is its spiritual house, a sanctuary loaded with history, passion, and memorable victories. The fact that Ferrari failed to classify a single car to Q3, breaking a streak that was kept intact since 1980, represented a symbolic and technical collapse of the 2025 project. Thousands of fans dressed in red, waving flags with the rampant Cavallino and singing with fervor from the stands, they remained at all silence as Q2 progressed and saw how Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton struggled without success to improve their chronos. The atmosphere went from emotion to disbelief, and from there to total disenchantment when both SF25 were eliminated, being relegated to intermediate positions on the grille, unable to compete even with equipment that in theory should be one step back, such as Mercedes or even Williams. It was not just a matter of numbers. Leclerc's time was more than a second slower than Oscar Piastri, who obtained the pole for McLaren. That margin is not only unacceptable for an elite team, it is devastating. The surprise was even greater because Ferrari had been showing signs of improvement in the previous circuits. It was expected that in Imola, a technical layout with medium-speed curves where traction and stability are key, the equipment could find its strong point. But the opposite happened. What should be a reaffirmation of its status as a contender to the title became a painful exhibition of structural deficiencies. Neither pilots could hide their frustration when getting off the car. Leclerc, visibly dejected, avoided the cameras and offered only short statements, while Hamilton, more direct, admitted that the car was out of balance from the first sector. What happened in that classification not only impacts sports, it has deep implications in the emotional, the media, and the strategic. Ferrari is a team that lives and breathes based on its connection with Italian fans. Imola should be a celebration, a turning point in the season, and ended up being a symbol of its deepest limitations. The pressure now does not come only from the rivals, but from the environment that demands immediate results. The Italian press, relentless as always, soon used words such as failure, shame, and collapse, even more raising Maranello's internal temperature. The classification in Imola was a silent earthquake that has left visible cracks not only in the morale of the team, but also in the narrative that Ferrari was trying to build for this year. Because if you cannot pay at home with your people in ideal conditions, where is the hope of fighting for a world title? This is the question that every conversation now flies into and outside the Ferrari box. What happened in the classification of the Romagna's Grand Prix with Ferrari cannot be understood only as a bad day. It is the reflection of a deeper and more prolonged structural problem, which questioned the very concept of SF25. The car, presented with great expectations as a refined evolution of the SF24, has not only failed to show clear advances, but has exposed weaknesses that seem to have aggravated. Imola was the perfect scenario to undress all these technical deficiencies, and he did it with brutal honesty. From the telemetry analysis, the failure pattern is clear. The instability of the rear axle of the SF25 is its Achilles heel. This problem is not new, but in a circuit like Imola, where medium and high-speed curves punish the lack of traction and balance, the magnitude of the deficit was evidenced. Curves such as the Villeneuve variant, Curve 3, and Piratella, Curve 9, became a true torture for both pilots. Charles Leclerc, who is usually extremely fine at the wheel, suffered to keep the back stable in the acceleration at the exit of Curve 3, losing half a second in that only section compared to Oscar Piastri. In Piratella, the difference was even more humiliating. More than 10 km per hour less in step speed, an eternity in terms of competitiveness. These differences are not attributable to the pilot. The car simply does not allow to extract the necessary performance. The weight distribution, aerodynamic behavior in lateral support, and the rear train response under transfer loads are decompensated. The SF25 does not have a solid balance base. This means that not even the settings and tuning allow to mitigate those deficiencies. Lewis Hamilton, who has demonstrated a legendary capacity to adapt his driving style, found a car that did not respond to any correction attempt. From the first training, his feedback pointed to a lack of predictability in the behavior of the rear axle. Each curve is an unknown, he would have commented to his engineer. The team has introduced several updates from the first races, mainly focused on the rear diffuser, the floor, and the front wing. But none of this has had the desired effect. In fact, some sources within the paddock point out that these improvements could be negatively interacting with the base chassis, exacerbating the phenomenon of instability in certain phases of the turn. A poorly executed concept, where the solutions implemented are patched symptoms without solving the root cause. And here is the real dilemma for Ferrari. To what extent can a car that was already born with unbalanced architecture be evolved? The statements after the classification did not leave margin for ambiguity. Frederic Vasseur was clear when they are not satisfied and that the team will analyze the entire package, a phrase that is usually the prelude to deeper structural changes. But time is limited. In a season where McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes have already demonstrated solidity in different conditions and traced, Ferrari cannot afford to wait in the middle season to introduce a B-spec of the SF25. The problem is not only gross performance. It is of behavior, of consistency return to return. While McLaren has a car that allows its pilots to attack with confidence, the Ferrari requires conservative driving, which is incompatible with the current classification where everything is decided in millimeter margins. This technical autopsy is not just a cold data analysis and design failures. It is the prelude to critical strategic decisions. Because if Ferrari does not act quickly to correct the course, the SF25 could become another link in the chain of disappointments that has marked the last years of the team. And in Formula One, the lost time is not recovered. It is paid at points, in reputation, and often in painful changes. The impact of what happened in the Imola classification is not limited to the technical level. The emotional and symbolic consequences of this failure are deep and could alter the direction of Ferrari's 2025 season. What should be a reaffirmation of his identity as a contender to the title ended up being a public nightmare, lived before thousands of fans who hope to see their team reborn. The defeat at home without palliative is much more than a bad classification. It is an open wound that doubts the stability of the project, the confidence in the leaders, and the moral of the pilots. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton left the garage with a hardened face, reflecting a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and disappointment. The Monegasco, who has loaded with Ferrari's expectations for years, was evasive with the media. Hamilton, on the other hand, was more direct in stating that the car was never in pace. These words, in another context, could have gone unnoticed, but here, with the background of a historical elimination in the classification, they become an alarm signal that cannot be ignored. Both pilots are accustomed to fighting for victories, not to survive in Q2. The pressure on the technical team is now overwhelming. Errors are no longer anecdotal, they are symptoms of a structural failure that, if not corrected soon, could condemn the entire season. Frederic Vasseur, team leader, faces one of the most delicate moments of his management. Not only should the paddock trust recover, but also stabilize a costume where frustration begins to leak. Internally, engineers are already evaluating radical changes in the development approach of the SF25, but the deadlines are narrow and the solutions require time and precision, two scarce resources in Formula One. On the media level, the reverse in Imola has had a multiplier effect. The Italian press, known for its intensity, has been especially hard. The holders of the newspapers have not saved in qualifiers, debacle, shame at home, Ferrari in ruins. This coverage amplifies internal noise and raises expectations for an immediate response. In this context, even minor strategic decisions become focus of scrutiny. Each next qualifying session, each race, will be seen as an opportunity for redemption or as a repetition of failure. But perhaps the most dangerous consequence is not external but internal. Trust, one of the most difficult variables to quantify in a Formula One team, has been beaten. When the pilots begin to question if the car will allow them to compete to the fullest of their capabilities, when engineers doubt the solutions applied, an environment is generated where performance is compromised beyond the data. Recovering that trust will be a task as complex as improving the car itself. Ferrari is at a crossroads. What happened in Imola can be the breakdown point that drives a deep and positive transformation, or it may be the beginning of a descending spiral that moves them away from the fight for the championship. The only certain thing is that, from now on, each decision will count. Because time does not expect, and the rivals either. Emilia Romagna's Grand Prix left a deep brand in the 2025 season for Ferrari. What should be a weekend of consolidation and national pride ended up becoming an emotional and technical blow that no one inside the team can allow to ignore. The classification was more than a bad result. It was a precise radiography of the structural problems of the SF25 and a clear warning that, if there are no urgent changes, the objective of the championship will fade before the middle of the season. This situation raises a question that now resonates inside and outside the paddock. Does Ferrari have the ability to react on time? It is not just about introducing new pieces or modifying the car configuration. The answer must be integral. It implies reviewing fundamental design concepts, strengthening work between pilots and engineers, and recovering the confidence that seems to have broken after Imola. If something has demonstrated the history of Formula One is that large teams can get up. And if you are interested in following every step of this season, signed and activates notifications.